Welcome, friends, to the Someone Gets Me podcast. I am your host, Dianne A, and I am so delighted that you're here. This podcast was created because I believe there is a visionary leader inside each one of us who is waiting to be seen. In each episode of Someone Gets Me, you will hear useful tips from successful visionaries who will share their stories about how being seen has allowed them to take their vision out into the world with action. Learning to listen to yourself again. Friends, hi. It's another episode of Someone Gets Me with me, Dianne A, your host. And this is the third installment of our trilogy, if you will, on food noise. And today's episode is about food noise and the neurodivergent experience of shutting down, listening to ourselves, which is part of the food noise situation. When we're little, we listen to ourselves a lot better than when we get older. I work with neurodivergent gifted professional people, and I cannot tell you how many of them, probably all of them, start out conversations with me with content talking about imposter syndrome, not trusting themselves in some areas of their life, maybe really excelling in some areas, but other areas not trusting themselves. A lot of self-deprecating humor, which says underneath they don't really trust themselves, right? And there's a lot of situations where people have learned over time not to listen to themselves, not to listen to their own ideas, their own emotions, their own intuition, their own hunches. They just ignore them and continue on a railroad track, if you will, that is taking them in a direction away from their authenticity and their sovereignty. And so part of food noise, part of overwhelm, and part of all of this conversation with neurodivergent people is that over time, we learn to not listen to ourselves, and even worse, to not trust it. And so I want to talk about that today, and I want to talk about some ways to begin to learn to listen to ourselves better. I know that with most of the people I work with, that this is a topic that comes up over and over again in different forms, in different ways, in different scenarios. Just the other day, I was working with a young man who is a professional in a very high-ranking position, and he's young for that position, and he's doing great. However, underneath, there is a part of him that doesn't really trust the fact that he can do what he's doing, even though he's doing it. So all the evidence is showing something different than his inner feelings are and his underlying current, if you will. That underlying current is the part of him that's been conditioned over years to not listen to himself and to not trust himself, when the reality is he's quite competent. I've also worked with a very well-known musician who's got lots and lots and lots of YouTube videos out and done lots of concerts and very prolific in his work. And one day we were talking and he said, well, I don't know, I'm just trying to make a living. I don't think that, my work is anything all that great, is anything all that special. And he was having not necessarily self-doubt about his musical skill, but doubt and mistrust about listening to his own inner authority about the value of what he puts into the world. So I opened up YouTube and I said, well, look at these millions of people listening and watching and making comments about how your music touches their soul in a specific way. And even with external validation and comments from people who don't know the person personally, it was still a little bit tricky. We still had to heal some of that inner work on the fact that, yes, this person has value and can listen to his own intuition and own knowingness, his own emotions, and trust them again. And so I think it's very important to realize that people manipulate food as a way to soothe. There's like a hierarchy. And so when we're really young, we will learn how very quickly to hold our breath, because we hold our breath when we're in pain. And so you can watch when people breathe out of their chest other than their lungs, they're holding on and moderating some kind of pain. And so babies and young children will hold their breath when they're in pain. I remember when my brother was really little and he was really having a hard time, he would go, I'm going to hold my breath till I die. And of course, the parents would laugh. But the truth is, what he was saying was, I hurt so bad in here that I don't know what else to do or say. And so the adult laughing didn't help the child. And that's what we do when we're little, right? We hold our breath. We're told when we get our first shots or go to the doctor when we're little children, hold your breath. It won't hurt so bad, because holding our breath moderates pain in the system. And so people learn over time to hold their breath. Many times I've been running group therapy sessions in different treatment centers I've worked in, and other talks I've done to thousands of people, where I can look around the audience and watch people breathing either out of the top of their chest or holding their breath. That is because the system is moderating a level of pain of some kind. And there's 8 kinds of pain, or eight categories. And so these things are important to realize. The next thing after holding our breath, when that stops working, is food. And so food noise comes right into this. It is right at a basic core level. People learn how to manipulate food in order to have some kind of control or management in their environment. They throw their food when they're kids. They won't let food touch. You know, you've got it too. Everybody has a thing about food. And when we do that, we are showing where our unhealed kind of staticky places are inside of us. And I believe that if we're sucking air and you're hearing my voice, there's something in there that's kind of a roadblock on some level, because I think that that's part of the human design, is for us to work through these things and elevate who we are and our authenticity. So I know we all have something, and it might be little now, but I see a lot of people with really severe food issues. And it's not just food noise from the end of the day. It could be, but there's also food noise about value. It's also food noise to medicate pain. It's also food noise to say, I'm lonely, so I'll eat. And then there's some people that I work with that eat and they don't even know why they're eating. They're not even hungry. They don't even want what they're eating, but they eat it. They've learned over time to stop listening to themselves. So they know they're not hungry. They know they don't want food, but yet they're eating. They're ignoring their body and their emotions and their mind, and still trying to fill a hole within them that cannot be filled from the outside, but they're trying to fill it from the outside. So it's a very big, pervasive issue. And another piece of this is a large part of the American diet is drastically depleted of health or nutrition value. So if you really are eating something looking for nutrition, you may not be getting what you think you are. Like I saw some research recently where they studied apples. Now I like apples. I didn't like them a lot when I was little, but I like them more now. And an apple, when I was a child, we'll say in the 70s, 80s, 90s, an apple then and an apple today in 2026 do not have the same nutritional value, because the soil's been depleted. The way things are happening in our agriculture has made it so that we think we're eating something totally healthy when it's not as healthy, because of the way things are manufactured and done. And so your food source is controlled. And unless you're growing your own food and you have taken care of your own rich soil and you have heirloom seeds, the whole thing, then realize that sometimes you can be eating something thinking you're getting nutrition, but still feel that hunger or that yearning for that food, which is searching for a specific nutrition. Like if you're craving chocolate, it means you really need magnesium. And so there's things that we can start correlating to realize that our systems are yearning to have its needs met. And we've learned how not to listen to ourselves, and we've learned how it is okay to not pay attention to what food we're eating. I work with a lot of different people, and I go and I help out in a clinic. And one of the things I notice is that people a lot of them, and I've seen this over the years, it's like a lot, is like, I'm going to eat healthy. And I'm like, okay. And that's good. I'm glad you made that decision. And then they start microwaving overly processed food that has no nutritional value. And what was in there that was nutritional just got killed by the microwaves. But they think they're eating healthy. And so we have been brainwashed as a society, at least in this country, to believe that something is good for you that probably isn't. Of note, I also have an app on my phone that helps show me what are good foods in the grocery store. And I've noticed that a lot of the foods that are marketed with the big labels of organic and healthy and whatever it all is, right? Those are the ones that come out with the lowest scores, with the most toxins in them, or the most problematic situations in the way they're produced. And some of the other different items don't have that as big as a label, and they come out higher. So I suggest you find a way to start really testing the food that you're buying, to realize that when you listen to your body, you want to give it the nutrition that it needs in order to support your life, your brain, your organs, your world. You know, if you have ADHD or you're gifted and you have all these sensitivities, we use up more nutrition than others because our bodies run a little faster. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of our nutritional needs. Because if we're not, and we're ignoring ourselves, the food noise gets louder and louder and louder, and then we start wondering why we're having so much trouble. So you weren't born distrusting yourself. You learned it over time. You also learned how to ignore yourself when you're tired, maybe, or when you've worked too much and you say, well, I just don't really care, right? It doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter, and you know it matters. And I've said it to myself where I've been so fatigued from a long day or whatever's going on that I'm like, it doesn't really matter. I'll eat anything. And I might not even be hungry. I do the same things I'm talking about because my brain is also conditioned. I have to work my way out of it just like you do. And so sometimes we eat when we're all excited about something, right? Like we use food for celebration all the time. Food at weddings, people will overeat at weddings or Thanksgiving or holidays or birthdays, and they make the excuses to eat whatever they want because they're celebrating. I even had a client one time that had just gotten out of the hospital from surgery from a celiac disease rupture, and it was a big mess, and she was really sick, and she got out of the hospital and then came to see me, a couple of weeks later, and had just gotten offered a job, and she was looking for employment, and she found this job that was part-time, perfect thing for her. She was all excited, and she comes into the session with me with this brown bag from a deli. And I said, what's in the bag? And she goes, 2 Cubans. One I'm going to have when I'm done here, and the other one I'm going to have for dinner tonight. I'm celebrating I got the job. And my only response was, and it kind of fell out of my mouth, was, so you're celebrating by eating a toxic food that landed you in the hospital that you just had surgery over, right? Like, that's what you're doing? And she didn't think of it that way. She thought of it as, I'm celebrating, and what food do I want to celebrate with? And a Cuban came to mind for her because, of course, we were in Florida, and that was a normal thing. But it just, the gluten and other toxins and those same kinds of foods just landed her in the hospital. She didn't connect it. She wasn't listening to her body. She wasn't listening to her emotions. She wasn't listening and paying attention. So it really matters that we start dialing into our body. Now, I have hundreds of these kinds of stories of different people that I've worked with over the years, and I have a few of my own because we're conditioned that way. So the problem that we're dealing with here about listening to ourselves in food and the food noise in general is not that somehow we have lost our ability to pay attention or know or feel our body and feel if we're fueled properly. It's not that at all. It's that we have been conditioned away from that. And so part of our rectifying that situation is to begin to say, okay, I have spent however long not listening to myself in the way that I should, or that I would like to in the future. And then begin to slowly listen to ourselves more. Now, it takes practice, and it takes learning how to trust ourselves again. It takes usually conversation with another person to have some kind of camaraderie or faith or person with us. But when we've learned not to listen to ourselves, which for some of us started like as early as kindergarten or first grade or before even, then when we're an adult and we're trying to make changes, this listening to ourselves things can feel very awkward or new. And food is, as I said, the second thing that we use to medicate. And so we want to be aware that food noise in and of itself comes because we are not paying attention and we're not listening, or we don't even trust what we are getting from our own emotions and our own intuition. So there's things we ignore. You can dial into those hyper focused moments and ignore the fact that you're thirsty or ignore the fact that you're hungry. Some people even ignore the fact that they're tired. I know I've done that, where I've pushed through and pushed through and pushed through. And it was almost noble to be tired and exhausted. I mean, when I was in college, it was noble to be exhausted and still pull off great grades, right? And some people do it in their work and they wonder why they get burned out. Well, you get burned out because you're a human being. And if you don't have a way to refuel the organism, you're real basic. If you can't refuel the organism, or you're not refueling it, or you're refueling it with something less than it's able to run on, then we create more and more problems, more and more depletion that leads to then burnout. And if that doesn't get our attention, we end up with some kind of health crisis. It's amazing to me how many people get a health crisis and all of a sudden they change their diet, or all of a sudden they make changes, because it sometimes, for some of us, takes a crisis to wake us up. As I say, we change for one of two reasons: inspiration or desperation. And sometimes it takes desperation, because sometimes when people are inspired, they don't trust it because they've learned not to listen to themselves. Do you see how this goes in circles? So when we need to rest, or we need to eat proper food, or we need to sleep, or we need to drink water, then it's important that we listen to those things. One of the ways we can do that as a neurodivergent person is when you're working a lot is I set timers on my phone so that I remind myself that at least every hour I get up and I stretch and I drink some water and I move around and I do things to kind of shift my energy a little bit, and then I come back to what I'm doing, so that even when I'm hyper focused, I'm taking care of myself. I used to not do that. I used to push through, and then I was exhausted and didn't know why. And when I got exhausted, I became very short-tempered and very difficult to deal with. I didn't want to be in my own skin, and most people didn't want to be around me when I was like that, and I don't blame them. Now, I didn't understand it at the time, and I didn't know why, but it was obvious now looking back that, oh my God, you were like hard to deal with. And who wants to deal with a prickly, hard person to deal with? Because the people I was around were also doing the same thing. So they were depleted and not taking care of themselves and burned out too. So it was just a big cluster mess. And so now that I'm older and wiser, and I've seen the difference in my world and in the world of the people I work with, I think it's important that we realize that it's time to start listening to ourselves again. It's been time to start listening to ourselves. It's been time to rectify the lie that we've all been taught, that we don't know better. We do know better within our own soul. Nobody outside of you knows better about you than you. Now, you may not be in touch with that, and you might need to do some work on how to get back in touch with that. That's where people like me come in, where we can help you get back in touch with that. But it's in there. It's not gone. It's just hiding because you haven't used it. It's like a weak muscle, right? Because sometimes people ignore their feelings. They ignore that they're lonely or angry. They ignore grief. Grief is a conflicting mass of emotion. And so people will ignore their emotions and stuff them down and then keep on pushing and wonder why they collapse. I see a lot in people who are caregivers for family members where they push through to do that, and it's noble to do that, but they don't take care of themselves while they're doing it very well. And so when that situation is taken care of, either their loved one passes away or is healed, right? And now that stress is mitigated, that other person often gets sick. Yeah, why? They weren't taking care of themselves to start with. And they were pushing through, and they weren't listening or paying attention, and they were putting other people in front of them. And so there's a nice, beautiful dance and balance of I can serve you and help you and be there for you, of course. And I need to also take care of myself too. It's a yes and, not an either or. And we're taught that it's either or. And I want to say it's really a yes and. And it is possible. It takes a different mindset and a different focus, but it's totally possible. You want to pay attention to your hunches and what those little ideas are that pop in your head. I had a hunch like this come to me this morning. I was thinking about philanthropy and serving others and my world and things that are important to me on different levels. And I thought, wow, gifted people have a hard time with impulse control and thinking through things and all of these different things. And I'm like, well, what if we turned that energy, that impulsive energy, and made it a philanthropy kind of energy? What if we did that? How that would change the world, right? We don't have to have billions. And so I started thinking about those things. And I'm like, instead of consuming food and medicating, allowing that energy to say, how can I be of service? And so I started pondering that. That was a hunch that I allowed myself to listen to, that I can say, okay, this is what I want to do with it. But I can't do anything with it if I ignore it, right? So you want to pay attention to your hunches. There's a lot of times things that you don't know why or how but it's important that you know it. So again, if you're ignoring yourself and you're not listening to yourself and you're using food to medicate, or you're holding your breath all the time, then sometimes you miss the value of these really great messages that come through. And we want to get the messages that come through. So ultimately, food noise. Ultimately, when we distill it all down, food noise is a self-trust problem. It's ultimately at the very core about not trusting ourselves, not knowing how to regulate, not having confidence and competence in the fact that we can slow down when we need to, that taking care of ourselves is very important, that we can feel our feelings and pay attention to our lives, that we don't have to always be lonely, and that boredom is not the enemy. It matters that we remember that the trust of ourselves is at the very core of food noise. If you do not trust yourself and you're not listening to yourself, then it's likely that what you're doing with food is not necessarily in your best interest. Now, you might trust yourself cognitively because you're smart. And you might trust yourself in other areas. But I'm talking about that deep core self-trust. Like, I trust who I am as a human being sucking air here on planet Earth. And that as I walk through life, I stand in my sovereignty. And I make decisions that are in alignment with who I am in my essence, which means my focus is on beauty and grace and poise and kindness and generosity and love, on those higher vibration kind of experiences. So when I let myself land in grief or anger or fear or pain or greed or avarice, I'm living from a place that lacks self-trust. So when you see people who are angry out there screaming and yelling and blaming other people and pointing fingers, they don't have any self-trust. Not really. Or they wouldn't be doing that. You notice the people who have a very calm self-trust don't do that, because there's no need for the deflection. There's no need to push out into the world and then have stuff come back in order to feel. I mean, that's why people do that. Why people blame and scream and yell, right? Is so that somebody will say, you can't do that. And then this comes back at them. And then that energy coming back at them lets them feel, so they can feel like they're alive, because they're so disconnected from who they are. So we get to learn how to stand in our authority as human beings sucking here on planet Earth, because you deserve the space you take up. You're here for a reason, on purpose with a purpose. You've heard that out of my mouth before. So what are we doing? Are we using food to block that purpose? Are we using food to delay or medicate or avoid saying yes to who we really are? What are we doing, right? It's so obvious. One of the things I see with food, and it happens with me too, is overwhelm. When I'm either overwhelmed because there's so many things to do, my brain shuts down, or I'm overwhelmed because things are so great, right? Like it's a lot of good emotions. When it gets to be a lot, it's easy to say food will take care of it. And it does medicate it. It does calm it down, because you eat food and your body has to go to the digestion part, and all that other stuff has to go get buried. It doesn't go away, it just gets buried so that your body can digest the food, right? That's not the way it's supposed to be. No. So I think that it really matters that we start paying attention to the fact that food is the effect of the spent cause. Just like substance abuse is the effect of a spent cause. Food's not the message. It's not the problem. It's the messenger. So when you have food noise, it means there's something deeper underneath happening that you might be so disconnected from, you're unaware of it. I know with most of the people I work with, that's the case. Until we start digging a little bit and we start looking things and putting things together, then we can see all the little data points and how it comes together. And now the person has authority and agency over what they're doing with their food. And magically, they feel better because they're not putting junk in their body as much, or because now they're making decisions that align with who they are. When we make a decision not aligned with who we are, it's because we're disconnected from who we are. I hope that makes sense. I think it's making sense. So if I'm triggering you about the food you eat or the food you don't eat, go to the show notes and schedule a get to know you call, and let's get some solution going. Let's get you on the path where you need to be, so that you aren't saddled with a situation where you're not listening to yourself and you're not honoring yourself, and food creeps in and holding your breath creeps in, and then they create major disruptions in your life. They can create health crises, right? That's type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular issues, digestion problems, autoimmune disease. All of these things come because we're not paying attention to ourselves. We're taught the answer is outside of ourselves, and it is not outside of ourselves. And so there's a lot of cost involved here. You pay a big price when you don't listen to yourself, right? You live in a system that teaches you not to listen to yourself. So when you get ready to listen to yourself, you become a radical. I mean, I've been called all kinds of names because I started listening to myself, because there was a long time in my life where I didn't trust myself and I didn't listen to myself. Like I knew things and I was very successful professionally, and inside I wasn't sure because I wasn't listening to myself. And the moment I began to do the work to listen deeply to myself, and I realized that one of the gifts I have as a gifted neurodivergent woman is I can listen to what somebody is saying, but I also am able to hear what somebody is not saying. And typically it's in what we're not saying that makes all the difference. And so in my work, that ability really serves my clients. And so I had to turn that ability on myself and use it to serve me. Now, often, most of the people I work with have all these great abilities and all these great ways of doing things that when they learn how to apply it in their own life, everything changes for the better. The things they've struggled with begin to take care of themselves. So I want to encourage you to realize that whatever you're doing with food is a sign of what's going on deeper within you. If you're not listening to yourself, or maybe you fooled yourself into thinking that you're listening to yourself, but you're not on deeper levels, which is very common for gifted people. It's very common. I had somebody I was working with a while ago, and I said, let's meditate for a minute, because he was feeling a lot of anxiety. So, well, let's just take a few breaths and meditate for a minute. And I said, put your hands on the tops of your knees, on your legs, on top of your knees, and just, uncross your body and just sit like that for a moment. And his eyes got really big. He goes, I don't ever really touch my legs or feel them. That's how disconnected. So we wonder why there's food noise when we aren't even paying attention to basic connectivity to our own bodies. So it's time that we, as gifted neurodivergent people who are here with mighty callings, and maybe your calling is as simple as stand in your authority and let your light shine and have it help brighten the world. Maybe it's something speaking or writing. How it comes out is irrelevant. The fact that you stand in your sovereignty as a beneficial presence on planet Earth is the point. And food dulls that when we abuse it in any way, overeating, not eating, eating the wrong things, not fueling ourselves properly. So our fuel, our food is our fuel. It's our medicine, not the other way around. Yeah. I know it's very something. So I want you to start listening to yourself. I want to encourage you to listen to you, listen to your own inner guidance. If you're unclear how to do that, then schedule a get to know you call with me. I will help you find someone to show you the way. I am not the only person, and there's lots of people who can teach you, but it's time that we all start saying, I'm going to live my best life and I'm going to do it from the inside out. I hope this episode has served you and the several previous about food noise and about the fact that we, as humans, can take back our own authority around the food we ingest, how we handle the noise, and what we do to listen to ourselves more deeply. And so remember, keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you are a rock star. You are here on purpose with a mighty purpose. So go out there, let your light shine. Free yourself from the bondage of all those little ignorant shadows that you have. Begin to work through them so that you can feel the beautiful light within you emerging. Until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, this is Dianne saying, be well. Thank you for listening. I trust you gained some valuable inspiration and information. Please join me and other visionaries in the Someone Gets Me Facebook group. Or for more information on my services and additional episode's, visit someonegetsme.com. Again, thanks for listening.